All right, cool. Thanks, everybody, and hi to everybody who's joining us from online. I won't be able to pull them, but I'm curious of those in the room, how many are part of the CIAS community, students, teachers, and how many came in from outside? Just awesome. Wow, cool. Great to know. Okay, cool. So again, my name is Brad Burge. I'm with the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, or MAPS. How many of you have heard of MAPS or know about MAPS? Cool, so I can great, move a little faster. That's great. So yeah, what Johan was just talking about was just an exceptionally broad, so much time, so much space in how these medicines can, and these drugs, these substances, however we categorize them, can work with human evolution. I'm going to focus on one tiny little corner of what might be called the psychedelic revolution or evolution. And I want to emphasize before I start that while MAPS is focused on clinical trials and medical research and framing of psychedelics in this very sort of mainstream, digestible way that we do appreciate, and our broader mission is actually to support the safe uses of psychedelics for any purpose whatsoever, beyond just therapy. So that could be creativity, healing, personal growth, anything like that, as long as it's done safely and with scientific backing. So our main focus right now, and for the last 33 years of MAPS's work, has been on MDMA. MDMA was what was criminalized in 1985. It was the inspiration for Rick Doblin to found MAPS in 1986, recognizing that the route to making psychedelics more accessible through any sort of political route, so asking Congress or getting elected representatives to change the laws or just to change the war on drugs, wasn't going to work. These representatives weren't listening to science, and they weren't listening to research. So what do we do at that point? And Rick was like, well, what do Americans love? Drugs. And they love legal drugs, especially. So let's go the FDA drug development route. Because once the FDA, a federal agency, says that a drug has a medical benefit, at that point a drug needs to be removed from a schedule. So our main focus right now is MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for post-traumatic stress disorder. MAPS is a nonprofit. It's a 501c3. We've done everything that we've done from individual donors. We don't have any government funding for psychedelic research. That has never happened until actually still no US government, but the Israeli government is going to be coming in with some contributions to support some conflict resolution psychedelic therapy work that MAPS is going to be working on soon. Happy to talk more about that afterwards. MAPS is, so again, our main focus is MDMA, and we've already obtained a generic name for MDMA. One thing that most people don't realize, I think, is that MDMA is going to be a generic drug once it's approved. It was first discovered in 1914, so long after psilocybin mushrooms were discovered. But it is based on chemicals found in naturally existing plants, specifically mescaline. That may have been why the Merck pharmaceutical company was interested in it originally, or they may have just been looking at drugs that they thought could stop or help with blood clotting, which is what they were looking for with MDMA. So its generic name is going to be midomethamphetamine. That's just an approved name. It'll also have a brand name once it's approved. For the first 3 to 5 years after approval, MAPS will have what's called an exclusive right to market MDMA. That's granted to any company that's the first to make a drug into a treatment for any condition. So MDMA has never been approved for anything before. And as a result, MAPS will be the only one for the first, actually it's 5 to 7 years post-approval. After that, any company, any drug company will be able to manufacture and sell generic MDMA. MAPS will remain the certifying body, though, for therapists. I'll get into a little bit of that in a second. I think a key thing to talk about, I talked to a lot of media and a lot of people who are just learning about this work for the very first time. There's misunderstanding often if people read just the headlines that, well, of course, you're developing MDMA into a drug. If people take MDMA all the time, they're going to be happy. Of course, you're healing their PTSD. But aren't they addicted to MDMA now? They're taking MDMA all the time. That's a simple misunderstanding that this is going to be just another regular, everyday treatment. I think a key thing to mention in conversations with folks is that this is a treatment that people only receive a few times. In the context of these clinical trials, it's only 3 sessions of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. The point being more to get people off drugs than to get them on another pharmaceutical regimen. MDMA-assisted psychotherapy always involves trained and licensed therapists. Once MDMA is approved, MAPS will be the certifying trainer for licensed therapists in order to be able to administer MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. That's a requirement of the FDA, by the way. One of the things that the FDA has it's called a risk evaluation mitigation strategy, and that's for the introduction of new drugs to market. They want to see that any risks associated with bringing those drugs to market are going to be handled, so looking at public health, and part of that is therapist training. So here we are in 2019. Our phase 2 trials started in 2010 and concluded in 2017. All of those results have now been published in the Journal of Psychopharmacology. We're now in phase 3 trials. That's the last phase of research that the FDA needs to see before deciding whether to approve a drug or a device. 200 to 300 participants. We're approximately halfway, our first half of the first half of those phase 3 trials. So still planning to wrap those up by the end of 2020, collect and analyze the results after that. We have 15 phase 3 sites spread out across the US, Canada, and Israel. 2 in Canada, 2 in Israel. We have 2 here in San Francisco, 1 at UCSF, and 1's a private practice site in the Castro. We didn't have any phase 2 trial sites here in the Bay Area for PTSD, so it's exciting to be able to have those now. Breakthrough therapy designation was something really, really super special that we got from the FDA. It's like getting extra credit on your assignment from the FDA, where they say not only can you move into phase 3 trials based on the results that you've gotten, but also we're going to say that this treatment represents a potentially significant advance over what's already available for PTSD. In the case of PTSD, that's sertraline or paroxetine, Prozac, and Paxil antidepressants. That's what's approved for PTSD now. MDMA, if approved, would be the 3rd drug to be approved for PTSD and in association with psychotherapy. So breakthrough therapy designation really catapulted the visibility of our work. Also now 2 other organizations have received breakthrough therapy designation for psilocybin-assisted therapy. One is a for-profit and one's a non-profit, USONA Institute and Compass Pathways. One is treatment-resistant depression and one is general depression. And we're still expecting approval in 2021. That is if the phase 3 trials go anything remotely close to what we saw in the phase 3 trials. So I'll just mention those results because they're pretty exciting. So MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is a 12-week course of psychotherapy. In the case of the clinical trials, once it's approved, that could be shorter. We use 2 therapists. Once it's approved, might be able to just use 1 therapist. During this 12 weeks, there are three times where people receive MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. It's a full day session. They come in the morning and they receive a single capsule right there from their clinician. They then stay the whole day and then stay the night and go home the next day. Then there's follow-up visits, and then the whole thing is repeated 2 more times. So we found in the phase 2 trials, that's 107 participants, US, Canada, Israel, Switzerland, 6 different trial sites, that after those 3 sessions, more than half, 54%, didn't have PTSD anymore. So more than half didn't have PTSD anymore. That's different than saying more than half saw some benefit. Actually, almost all saw some benefit. Almost all saw some reduction of symptoms. There are no treatments in existence where you get that kind of result for PTSD, and that's really not an exaggeration. A year later, with no further sessions, that number 54% went up to 68% without any further treatments. People kept getting better. Some continued psychotherapy, some didn't. Many stayed off their medications after tapering off for the MDMA treatment. but that number went up to 68% a year later. So something internal has changed. MAPS is operating as a nonprofit still. We now have a wholly owned subsidiary for-profit, MAPS Public Benefit Corporation, that's actually conducting the research. That's for tax reasons and also for income reasons. Once we have approval that all of the income to the benefit corporation will then get passed back up to the nonprofit to sustain our work. So we won't have to ask the whole world for money as much anymore. We're conducting a therapy training ongoing. Right now we have all the therapists currently trained for the phase 3 trials. The key kind of bottleneck for how fast we're going to be able to get this treatment to as many people as possible is going to be how many therapists can we train and how quickly. More information about the therapy training program is up on the website. Feel free to ask me about it later. But yeah, we're really trying to drive a lot of interest in that now. Expanded access, that's another program that the FDA has, and we're in the process of applying for it. We expect to receive approval for it in the next month or two. What that is a program for the FDA that the FDA has for patients who are not enrolled in the clinical trials to get access to treatments that are still in phase 3 on a case-by-case basis. So we don't know how many are going to be approved for that, but we're looking at around 10 centers spread across the country to be able to start providing this therapy under this FDA expanded access program as soon as probably April or May is our guess at this point. Working with a lot of different research institutions. Won't go through all of them. Here are some of the additional studies that we're conducting, not just PTSD. We have an ongoing study of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy with cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy. It's not exactly couples therapy, but that's treating two people at the same time with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, where one person has PTSD and the other person is a partner or a significant other or friend or brother or sister who's impacted by this person's PTSD. So we're actually working with Candace Monson, who is the developer of cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy, and now she's excited to try to throw MDMA in the mix and see if she can make it even better. We're doing basic research, effects of MDMA on startle testing. That's MDMA on the fear response. That is, in fact, Rick Doblin, the founder of MAPS, connected up to the little shock mechanism. He wanted to make sure that it wasn't too oppressive before he started enrolling people in the study, so he went and did it himself. We had a study in Marin that concluded and was published, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for anxiety in people with life-threatening illness. We will be doing more of these other studies once the PTSD trials are completed. We can only do so much at once. It's amazing we're able to do this much. MDMA-assisted therapy for social anxiety in autistic adults, that also went well. Results also published, justifying some further research there. That's the treatment of social anxiety, not the treatment of autism, to be very clear. Ibogaine is going to be our next major indication once we are through the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD research. There is such an epidemic of opioid abuse and addiction in this country and everywhere, and there's really strong evidence that Ibogaine-assisted therapy could help with that. So we really want to focus on that. We're actually in the process of developing a protocol, looking for researchers, looking for a source of Ibogaine, and so on. Keep an eye out for that. Ayahuasca-assisted therapy. We're also developing a clinical trial protocol using ayahuasca and addressing all of the complexities there. Ayahuasca, of course, traditionally used in a ceremonial context, not in a clinical one. It's likely an ayahuasca clinical trial will not take place in a sterile clinical context and will incorporate some of the ceremonial elements as well. Our marijuana study, that is concluded. We're analyzing the results right now, and that paper will be published soon. That's actually the first ever trial of smoked marijuana for PTSD, done under the FDA drug development guidelines. There are no other trials that could potentially ultimately lead to cannabis being approved by the federal government. That is whole plant cannabis. There's all sorts of isolated cannabinoids and synthetic cannabinoids and non-smoking delivery systems. But as far as the smoked plant, this is the first trial that could actually lead to that. The Zendo Project is very much beyond our research, but it's our way of acknowledging that people are and continuing to use recreational psychedelics or psychedelics in non-therapeutic contexts. We bring the Zendo Project, which is our peer support program, trained volunteers and staff to festivals all over the world and work directly with event production staff and with medical personnel and with law enforcement to make sure that people who are having difficult psychedelic experiences and aren't in a medical emergency can be brought to us and we can take care of them rather than being sent to the hospital for involuntary additional drugging or to jail, causing further trauma. Stuff is changing really fast. This is actually from a couple years ago. There's reason to think that these numbers have changed, is that actually when you poll people, over half of people would try psychedelic therapy if it were approved. Over half of people support it. These are voting adults in the US, and so we might be surprised at the level of support that we're getting. And briefly, I'm just going to run through some slides showing representation of psychedelics right now in the media, how that's looking right now. There's been a long track record of a lot of bad propaganda and bad headlines, but these days, as far as psychedelic therapy and research is concerned, journalists are our friends, and they're trying to tell the story right. This is kind of the old way that they were represented in the media and still are a little bit when they're searching these website catalogs. And this is the direction that we're moving. Again, I have no intention of sterilizing psychedelics. MAPS has no intention of medicalizing them per se. But this is a way that we can communicate about them to skeptical mainstream audiences and open up more spaces where we can have conversations about other uses. Just a few of the media hits from the last 6 months. A few more. You'll notice this is extremely bipartisan, multi-partisan. There's a lot of partisans. Rick Doblin's TED Talk, we've been trying to get him on TED for many, many years. This last year, in April, Rick Doblin was on the main TED stage in Vancouver, and as of today, it has over 2 million views. Since then, it's already one of the top-ranked TED Talks on TED.com. It was the first time psychedelics have been discussed at TED. I know Graham Hancock had this big banned one, but that was actually a TEDx independent talk. It wasn't TED National doing it. So 2 million views. This is a recent article from the Washington Post. We were working with this reporter, Sarah Bacon, because she's going to do this big feature article about MDMA-assisted therapy and going to go interview some study participants and some therapists. She didn't end up including much from us because she ended up taking it herself, seeking out MDMA-assisted psychotherapy herself for some issues that she was having related to a life-threatening condition. Highly recommend this article. And it's her story. This is a feature writer for the Washington Post. Sarah Bacon, yeah, as in breakfast. Bloomberg Business Week had a great feature on our fundraising efforts at Burning Man. We've been very successful there. I wouldn't agree with the creation of the graphic itself. I might not make this one with Rick Doblin running on ecstasy all the way up to the man. But I think it's highlighting both how mainstream psychedelics are becoming and how mainstream Burning Man is becoming. Michael Pollan's book, if you haven't checked it out, that has totally changed things. Michael Pollan, one of the most respected, or well-read anyway, journalists in the world, really speaking positively and having his own experiences here. Our Psychedelic Science Summit just took place in Austin, 800 people, sold out, first time we've had a conference in Texas. Tim Ferriss was there. He interviewed on stage one of our researchers. That podcast is now up, all about how to become a psychedelic therapist. And we're at CIAS, so a lot of people might be interested in that. That'd be a great thing to check out as well. Tim Ferriss Show. And that's all I got. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Looking forward to the conversation. Thank you for the question.